So to get to views, we're going to go to Structure and Views. And if you don't see this item here in the menu, you may need to refresh the page once. And we're going to click Add New View. So we're about to build a view that displays a block in the sidebar for a single product. Now, this wizard helps us set some basic information for the view, and we've gone through this wizard before in some of our previous site building videos. But even this first question here makes us think about how we're going to structure our view. And one of the big questions is how we're going to begin our view. What are we going to base our view off of? So we have two options in this case. We can base our view off of product nodes, or we can base our view off of review nodes. Now, we're displaying a product in the sidebar, so to me it kind of makes more sense to base it off of a product. However, if we do it that way, then we're going to end up having to make more configuration choices in our view. We're going to go through both processes, both create a view that's based off of products and one that's based off of reviews. We're going to start with the reviews because it's going to be easier to build this view. But as I said before, the product-based view might be a little bit more natural in terms of organization and finding what we're looking for later on. So for the view name, I'm going to name it product related to review, and then in parentheses, I'm adding review based, just to make it clear what the source node type is for this view. Now, one other question that comes to mind here is whether we're going to group our views together as multiple displays under a single view. So we have the option of creating multiple displays based on a particular configuration setting in views. So we have a set of defaults, and then we can build multiple displays using those defaults, but then overriding them specifically for each display. So when do we decide to group them together, and when do we decide to split them off into separate views? So this is actually a question that's come up before, which is how do we decide when to recycle configuration, when to reuse it? One of the benefits to reusing configuration that we've talked about already is that if multiple pieces of configuration share a particular setting, and we know that whenever that setting gets changed, we want it to change across the board for every piece of configuration, then it makes sense to centralize on using one setting there. So for example, right now we're creating a view based on the review node type. So we may want to bundle together all of the different review-based views that we create from here on out. I've seen different Drupal shops use this method, and to me it makes a lot of sense. But the downside is that if we group them together into a single view and have multiple displays within that view, then if we inadvertently change a default that not all of the displays share, so for example, we change the number of items to display from 5 to 10, and it affects displays that we didn't intend on affecting, then it might be a while before we figure out that we've actually made some configuration changes that we didn't want to make. So ultimately, even though it might get a little bit unwieldy on our views listings page, it's safer on the whole to create a separate view for every view display that you create. There will, of course, be exceptions where you feel like there's so much in common between two different views that you want to use a different display instead of a different view altogether, and that's totally okay. But we're going to go the safe route here, just so in the future, as we build multiple views out, we don't accidentally change a default for a different view than we intended to. So because we're creating individual views for each instance, our view name needs to be pretty descriptive. So if we were instead bundling together multiple displays under a single view for displaying any review-related view, then we might want to name this reviews, this view name, and leave the descriptive words to the display name instead of the view name. But again, since we're creating an individual view for each display, we want this name to be descriptive because it's going to display in multiple places on our site. Okay, so that was a lot of theoretical stuff about views, and it might be a little confusing because we haven't put any of it into practice yet, but there were two important ideas that came out of there that you should wrap your mind around at some point. One is how we group displays of views. Do we group multiple displays that have some commonality like the node type into a single view, or do we use separate views for each instance? That's a design decision for you, the site builder. And the second question is when we have two different node types or two different entity types to choose from for basing a view on, which one do we choose? Sometimes the most intuitive one is not going to be the easiest one to build a view off of. But we're about to dive into that in detail so you can see what I mean by those two different scenarios.